Hello, my name is Jonathan Stalling, and I'm the editor of Chinese Literature Today magazine and book series here at the University of Oklahoma. Today we're celebrating the third awarding of the Newman Prize for Chinese Literature, this year awarded to Yang Mu, a Taiwanese poet. I'm also joined by Ruth and Harold J. Newman of the Newman's Prize, and wanted to talk a little bit about your background with Asia and provide a little background about the origin of the prize. So the question begins here at OU. As an undergraduate, you were a geography major, and I'm wondering if China came into the picture as a young man, and if so, maybe something about some of the professors who introduced the topic to you.
I think China's always been a part of my interest going back to the age of 8 years old, because I was a collector of Chinese stamps. Because you were able to buy during the 30s, collecting stamps was a hobby that was very widespread, much less today. And you could buy 100 stamps for a nickel and 1,000 stamps for a dime. And so the dime I couldn't afford, but the nickel I was, and I was able to buy Chinese stamps. And it gave me a sense of the world. For some reason, I've always had an interest in maps and geography, and so stamp collecting was a beginning, and I came to the university to major and started to major in geography, and pursued that. I took courses here, in fact, in my senior year, which would have been 1951. I did a study of China, the history of China-American trade from 1786, when the Empress of China went from New York, I guess, to Canton. And that was the start of my, along the length of the things that I would do relating to China. And when I graduated from OU, I decided to get a graduate degree in South Asian studies, not necessarily Chinese studies, but South Asian studies. And I went to the University of Pennsylvania School of South Asian Studies. And while I was there in my first year, which would have been 1951, it was the time of the Korean War, and my graduate professor in geography, who was a colonel in intelligence, was drafted back during the war. And there was absolutely nobody at the University of Pennsylvania that had any degree in geography. And at that time, I was 20, just before I was 21, and they asked me whether I would take over his courses. So I wound up teaching 9 hours a week of geography, primarily stressing age in geography, and particularly China and India. So it goes back 60 years to an interest that I've had in that area of the world. And I got my degree in South Asian Studies in 1953. And then when I came back, got out of the Army, I was during the Korean period. I came back, I went to the Harvard Business School to major in what was called at that point foreign trade. And went to work on Wall Street with looking at opportunities in foreign investing. There were very few at that point in time, but over the next intervening years, from the late middle 50s to the late 60s, opportunities opened up. And by the end of the 60s, I was investing in Japan and going to Hong Kong with clients that I had. And and my emphasis really changed for me of going to Hong Kong and then to mainland China.
Could you tell us a little bit about your first time?
Of which?
The first time you went to mainland China.
Well, my wife and I went to mainland China in 1978 or so. There was one thing that I always wanted to do, and Ruth was always interested in a variety of things, including China. I mean, we bonded because of a mutuality of interest in a variety of things. And in 78, we went to the Great Wall of China. And it was an unusual experience because the guide that we had, the young woman who was a guide, was a little nervous about taking us we gave her a map of of the United States, and she was a bit hesitant just to take a map of the United States. At that time, we were walking up the Wall of China. Now, my wife and I see this a little differently, so I'm going to give you my interpretation of it. All of a sudden, I hear my name yelled out on the Great Wall of China in 1978, and I look around, and there, standing on one of the overpasses on the Great Wall, was a guy that I played tennis with the week before. I mean, this was in 1978. And right after that, there was this group of Italians that was running up the Great Wall in cut denims, yelling, "Avante, Avante." That was not my image of the Great Wall of China, but we overcame that anyway.
It's emblematic of the opening of China, right?
Right. It was
so not long after this, you became a patron of Asian cultural organizations like the Asia Society. But when exactly did you? Obviously, your investment work took you to Asia quite often, your personal interests. But when did you start working in the cultural arts organizations that promote a better understanding of Asian culture, especially the Asia Society?
Well, I think we've been involved in the Asia Society for, it'll be another year and a half. It'll be 25 years.
Wow.
And Ruth is a trustee emeritus. I'm still on the board. We switch off every 9 years or so. And we support particularly the area of the arts. We've developed the largest collection, I'm told, the largest collection of any museum in the country of contemporary video art at the Asia Society. We've run some of those works to the University of Oklahoma for their museum here. So that was a major, and we travel with the Asia Society to various parts of the world looking at art collections and things of that nature. And so it's been an ongoing experience. A woman who's head of the museum and director of cultural programs, is a PhD in contemporary art, Chinese art, and is probably the world's leading expert on contemporary Chinese art. And we brought her to the University of Oklahoma a few years ago to give a lecture. But that process, starting earlier, when Ruth and I endowed the Institute for China Issues, it wasn't just going to be about policy and international affairs and geopolitics. Culture matters. Today, if there's the misunderstanding and mistrust is an important issue that we have to overcome. And one way of overcoming that is through cultural exchanges and the understanding of the culture of those countries that we're involved with. Our major interest at this point is China. So actually, I've been part of at the Asia Society, something which hopes to bring foreign direct investment from the United States, from China to the United States. And that's been an expanding opportunity for the Chinese. They want to come here. They want to invest. We have to figure out where both they trust us and have less misunderstanding, and we trust them. And through that, we had a year ago, before December, we had a cultural exchange, and that cultural exchange was for us to bring Yo-Yo Ma and Meryl Streep and Alice Waters and Amy Tan to Beijing for a 3-day period of cultural exchange, and it was a marvelous experience.
What about Little Buck?
What's that?
Little Buck.
I know, a dancer that's now become prominent because, one, he was picked by Madonna to accompany her on a world tour, is a young dancer, a young black dancer from Memphis who has the style that's starting to get picked up, and he was there also, and it was an amazing experience for everybody.
He's one of my son's favorite dancers.
Is that
yeah.
Really?
Absolutely.
Oh,
yeah.
well,
He can tell you all about him.
His style is called juking.
We have pictures of him.
I've seen the picture of him on the wall dancing.
I mean,
Unbelievable.
on YouTube. It was really quite something.
We've spent time with him. He's a wonderful young man. But in terms of talking with Peter about where we should go, about the need to...
And this is Peter Gries, the
Gries,
director of the U.S.
Yes, Professor Gries, who's the chair of the Institute for U.S.-China Issues. And we recognize the need to expand the horizons beyond the more formal things regarding issues and make it include cultural issues. And one of the things that came out of that in our discussions was his idea to have a prize to give for contemporary Chinese literature. And the first one was Mo Yan, which was 4 years ago. And one of the things that was most interesting at the dinner for that was there was a young woman sitting next to me that was an exchange student from Kosovo. I didn't know who she was. I asked Peter, who is she? She says she won the prize for writing an essay on a short story by Mo Yan, which was submitted by a number of students all over the state of Oklahoma.
The Newman Young Writers Award.
And she won. That's right.
Yeah.
And I asked about her background, and she's from Kosovo. Her parents are doctors there. She came to the university on an exchange student. She was in Moore. She went to Moore High School. Her native language is Albanian. She's Muslim. And here she is in Oklahoma winning a prize for writing an essay on a Chinese short story. I mean, if that isn't the most incredible, to me, story of what globalization is all about, and it was here in Oklahoma, and it made me feel very good.
Ruth, what was it like waking up to hear the news that the first winner of the Newman Prize had won the Nobel Prize for Literature?
Look what we did. We were ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and I was so happy that it was Oklahoma because it's out of the context, in terms of what you would expect. And I was talking to a friend of mine that morning who I worked with at Goldman Sachs 55 years ago, and then became the number 2 man in the State Department under George Shultz, and we worked together on projects, water projects, nonprofit water projects in India, Kenya, and Ghana. We were involved in that process. And he says to me, if I want to win the Nobel, now he's 90 years old now, and he says to me, if I want to win the Nobel Prize, do I have to win the Newman Prize first? And how long should that take?
It won't hurt.
So I said, John, in your case, we'll speed it up. And that's...
it was thrilling.
Yeah.
It was truly, truly thrilling.
Yeah, it was such a... You wouldn't have expected it.
I wanted to tell an anecdote from behind the closed doors of the selection process of this year's winner, Yang Mu. When the discussion was taking place, it came up that in the charter of the Newman Prize, the poet should speak to a common humanity. And that actually became part of the kinds of questions that were, borne out in the selection process. And his work came out because it did, of course, have the greatest depth of time, 4 or 5 decades of work, but also is known for his fusion of Western and classical Chinese influences. It's very synthetic. And of course, this year's Young Writers Award are given to Oklahoma students who are writing classical Chinese poetic forms using English. And so tonight it'll be wonderful to meet these young people and to hear their poems as well. So one last question, if I may. Also a patron of the arts, the visual arts, as you mentioned, video art in particular, for the University of Oklahoma, very generous gifts of wonderful works of art. You had mentioned having amassed a large collection. I want to know, Ruth, in particular, I know you have the eye for art from the 60s forward with the porcelains in Hong Kong to the present. How do you know when an artwork speaks to you? And can you just tell us a little bit about how you meet artwork? How do you, know it's good?
It's very personal. And I'm not that interested in its provenance or where it came from. It's a completely visual thing. If I see it and I just have to look and look and look, that's the piece for me. Hal is much more interested in where it comes from and
He's a geographer.
the history of it. For me, that's interesting, but it's not my main thrust at all. I mean, I'm not going to buy a piece because it's old and it's valuable if I don't like it. I have to like the piece, and it has to speak to me in some way, and that's the way I choose the art. So, as I told you last night, when you say collection implies a much more structured way of amassing things, history, provenance, and that sort of thing. So we have more of an accumulation of things.
Yeah.
That's
how we
define
that's how we define
Accumulation.
ourselves. Actually, we say, people say, talk about your collection. We correct them. We say we don't have a collection. We have an accumulation.
I like it.
That's what we do.
Because it's along the years when we've traveled and we've seen pieces that we like and we want to have, we try to buy them if we can. And it has no reference to anything else. It's the piece as it stands alone.
One of the things that's really why I'm very happy with poetry at this point, because the other two have been largely prose literature, is that poetry is at such the heart and the soul of Chinese. I mean, that's how classical Chinese art and classical Chinese poetry, which is something that I've really enjoyed for a number of years to me is the essence of the Chinese soul. And I was very happy to see that the poet that we're honoring at this point is a combination of both that classical feeling, the sense of where the Chinese have come from, and look at both the natural and the individual in life, how they combine the two. And as we spoke last night, that metaphor, which is so particular, which is so broadly used in Western poetry, was not really evident until maybe the 13th or 14th century in Chinese poetry. So Chinese classical poetry is really the way you felt it and saw it as it was. And you didn't have to sort of decipher what that it was clearer, it was simpler. And that's what I love in the Tang and early Song poetry, and that's what makes me feel good about this artist, that he combines that sense of timing with the period of time that he's living in. And we're both very pleased. It's an honor for us to do this, of the way that it's grown and the justification that we have because of what the Nobel Prize did. Well, it took them a little longer than it took us to recognize that, but that's all right.
Well, thank you so much for helping bring about this prize and the recognition that it's brought to these writers, of course to the University of Oklahoma as well. We all benefit from literature getting more attention in the public space. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.